A Wall Street billionaire faked his death to test his wife and children's love. But what he discovered about his driver changed everything. New York City, present day. Billion-dollar deals, luxury skyscrapers, and family empires built on secrets. Everyone thinks they know what power looks like. A tailored suit. A name that moves markets. A penthouse overlooking Central Park. But what if the man at the top of the food chain disappears, not because he's afraid to die, but because he wants to see who would cry? Meet Richard Langston, one of Wall Street's most feared and respected billionaires. He didn't build his empire on luck. He built it on betrayal, loyalty, and control. But behind closed doors, his home wasn't a haven. It was a silent battlefield. His wife smiled in public and sneered in private. His grown children called him Dad only when they needed something. And the only man who truly knew his schedule drove him in silence. Then one day, Richard vanished, his car found wrecked on the Brooklyn Bridge. No body, no witnesses, just a shattered windshield and a calculated plan. Because Richard Langston wasn't dead. He was watching, and what he saw from the shadows shattered everything he thought he knew. This is a story of money, betrayal, hidden bloodlines, and the one person he least expected to call son. So sit tight, because in the city of skyscrapers, sometimes the deepest secrets live on the ground floor. Midtown Manhattan buzzed like a living thing. The air smelled of ambition and exhaust fumes. Glass towers reached for the heavens, while thousands rushed beneath them chasing dreams that would never pay their rent. But 42 stories above it all, behind a wall of smoked glass in the Langston Financial Tower, Richard Langston watched the world like a hawk. He didn't blink much, didn't smile often. A tall man with salt and pepper hair, sharp blue eyes, and a tailored Navy Tom Ford suit. Richard had the kind of presence that made interns stutter and board members check their cufflinks twice. Today, like most days, he was annoyed. "Why are they buying into crypto again?" he muttered, scrolling through the morning financial briefings. His chief of strategy, a 30-year-old Harvard Golden Boy named Connor Wexler, cleared his throat nervously. Retail investors are optimistic again. TikTok influencers pushing coins. "Idiots," Richard growled. "You don't put trust in hype. You put trust in results." But trust was exactly what Richard lacked. Not just in the market, but in life. Down the hallway, his wife Vanessa Langston was likely having her usual morning mimosa, dressed in designer silk robes that cost more than most people's cars. A former model-turned-socialite, Vanessa played the role of loyal wife with the skill of an actress. In truth, their marriage had become more of a press alliance than a partnership. She spoke to him like a sponsor, not a husband. Smiles in public, eyes rolled in private. Their two adult children, Trevor and Juliana, were worse. Trevor, 27, had been handed a VP title and still couldn't explain what the company actually did. He wore $1,000 loafers, but never earned $1 himself. Juliana, 25, spent more time planning influencer brunches than building her real estate portfolio. But she liked to throw around the phrase generational wealth as if she'd fought for it. They called Richard Dad on holidays, and whenever they needed something wired to their accounts. But they didn't know him. No one did, except maybe one man. Marcus Jennings, his driver. A quiet, disciplined man in his mid-30s, with warm brown eyes and a military posture. Marcus didn't say much. He never did. But he was always there. In the morning with the car ready. At night, when Richard was too tired to talk. In silence, Marcus became the only constant in Richard's life. Loyal, steady, dependable. Still, Richard had grown weary. He stared at his reflection in the tinted glass. A billionaire on paper. A ghost at home. That night, at his penthouse overlooking Central Park, he poured a glass of 18-year-old scotch and sat alone. Vanessa was at a gallery opening, though he suspected she was with her so-called tennis coach. The kids hadn't called in weeks. His phone buzzed. An alert from his own private security firm. A new threat. A minor cyber breach in his offshore accounts. But that wasn't what kept him up. It was a thought. A question. If I disappeared today, who would mourn me? The answer settled in his chest like a weight. No one. Unless they thought it meant losing the money. He walked to his private study, opened a drawer, and stared at a folder labeled Protocol 11. His attorney had once joked, "That's the plan you activate if the world turns on you." Richard had chuckled back then. Tonight, he wasn't laughing. He picked up his phone, dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Michael, it's Richard. Activate Protocol 11. Full simulation. No leaks. No second chances." A pause. "Are you sure?" the voice on the other end asked. "Yes," Richard replied, his voice cold. "Let's see what happens when the checks stop clearing." 2 weeks later, Manhattan awoke to chaos. Billionaire Richard Langston presumed dead in plane crash over Atlantic. The headline plastered every screen from Times Square to CNBC. Private jet. Technical malfunction. No survivors. Debris washed ashore near the coast of Portugal. On the 6 a.m. Bloomberg broadcast, the anchor's voice trembled with shock. Langston, founder of Langston Financial, a man who once moved markets with a tweet gone. But Richard Langston wasn't gone. He was watching. From a surveillance room in a private estate in the Catskills, equipped with satellite feeds, burner phones, and voice-masking software, Richard sat in a plain gray hoodie, drinking black coffee. His clean-shaven face now wore the early signs of a beard. The billionaire had vanished. The man left behind was just Richard. "Status?" he asked. Michael Raines, his personal attorney, and the only one who knew the full truth, tapped on his tablet. "Funeral set for Friday. Closed casket." Vanessa agreed immediately. "She's already contacted your estate planner." Richard scoffed. "How fast?" 6 hours after the news broke. Richard said nothing, but inside, something curled cold and tight in his gut. Across town, in their penthouse, Vanessa Langston sat with champagne in hand, dressed in black silk, dabbing her dry eyes with a designer tissue as a lawyer read out sections of Richard's preliminary will. "We'll need to wait 30 days for the trust to execute," the man explained. "Assuming no foul play, the distribution will begin immediately. Vanessa, you and the children are listed as primary beneficiaries. Of course, Mr. Langston's offshore assets will be claimed under the marital clause," Vanessa finished, smiling faintly. "I've been over this with Richard's advisors." Trevor leaned forward. "And what about the company?" "You'll be named interim chairman until the board votes," the lawyer replied. Juliana, lounging in leggings and an oversized designer hoodie, scrolled Instagram. "Do we really need to talk business the same week Daddy died?" Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "This is exactly when we talk business." But across the room, someone else listened silently. Marcus Jennings, still dressed in his all-black driver uniform, stood against the wall like a shadow. The family barely acknowledged him. When the room cleared, Marcus stepped closer to Vanessa. "I'd like to take some time off. Out of respect." Vanessa barely glanced up. "You'll be paid for the month. Take the time." "Thank you." As he left the penthouse, Marcus looked back once. Something about the whole scene made his chest tighten. It wasn't grief. It was performance. The champagne. The quick talk of assets. The fake tears that dried too quickly. Back in the Catskills, Richard watched it all unfold through encrypted cameras placed throughout the penthouse. "Replay that," he said to Michael, pausing the video on Vanessa's subtle smirk as she signed a document. Michael nodded. "You still sure you want to do this?" Richard stared at the screen. "I'm not testing their grief," he muttered. "I'm testing their love. Are you ready for what you might find?" "No, but I'm ready to know." Meanwhile, social media erupted. Tributes poured in from other billionaires, Fortune 500 CEOs, and media elites. Celebrities posted black and white photos of Richard with hollow captions. Hashtags like #RememberLangston trended worldwide. But behind the screens and memorials, the Langston family was already rearranging their empire, moving assets, setting appointments, meeting with PR firms to shape the narrative. And Richard, he sat in silence, in hiding, realizing just how quickly the people closest to him had turned grief into strategy. But he wasn't done. This was only the beginning of the game, and everyone was playing it, even the ones who didn't know it yet, especially Marcus. The day of Richard Langston's memorial service was drenched in irony. High-profile mourners crowded the St. James Episcopal Church in the Upper East Side. Black SUVs lined the street. Celebrities arrived in designer suits, paparazzi clicked behind barricades, and the mayor of New York gave a heartfelt eulogy about legacy, philanthropy, and the American dream Richard embodied. But inside the grand marble sanctuary, beneath vaulted ceilings and golden stained glass, the real performance began. Vanessa Langston stood at the front pew, draped in a floor-length black dress, pearls around her neck, a sleek veil grazing her cheekbones. She looked regal, serene, and utterly unshaken. If grief were a currency, Vanessa had mastered the art of spending just enough to look believable. Trevor, tall and stiff in his custom Armani suit, barely glanced at the oversized photo of his father, displayed near the altar. Juliana wore designer sunglasses inside, texting beneath the pew while chewing mint gum. They cried for appearances, not for Richard. But not everyone was faking it. In the very back of the church, dressed in an old but pressed black suit, Marcus Jennings stood against the wall again, like an outsider looking in. His jaw was tight, his eyes focused. There was something in the way he looked at the Langstons that day, like a man trying to solve a puzzle whose pieces didn't quite fit anymore. Meanwhile, at the Catskills estate, Richard Langston paced the room, the service live-streaming on the big screen. "Pause it," he snapped. The image froze on Vanessa's face as she delivered her speech. Her hand clutched a printed copy, voice calm, steady, rehearsed. Richard was a visionary, a loving father, a devoted husband, she said. Richard scoffed. Loving husband? She spent the last 5 years sleeping in the guest wing. Michael glanced up from his laptop. You don't believe she ever loved you? Richard didn't answer right away. He stared at the screen, then pointed. Zoom in. Her right hand. There's something tucked in her palm. Michael enlarged the image. It was a note. Handwritten. Not part of the speech. Enhance that. I want to know what it says. Michael sighed. This is starting to look less like a test of loyalty and more like a sting operation. Richard didn't blink. Same difference. Later that evening, back at the penthouse, the wake turned into a networking event. The Langston living room, once sterile and silver, was alive with clinking glasses and curated tears. Private bankers, board members, and magazine editors sipped expensive whiskey while reminiscing about Richard's greatness. Vanessa drifted from group to group, dabbing her eyes with a cloth napkin and smiling graciously when someone complimented her strength. But she moved like a woman newly unshackled, graceful, sure-footed, and calculating. Juliana cornered her mother in the kitchen. Okay, Mom, how long do we have to keep pretending like we're devastated? Vanessa gave her a sharp look. Long enough to secure the trust. After that, cry only in daylight, preferably in front of a lens. And what about the press? They'll get a widow's story, a soft-focus cover shoot, maybe a scholarship in your father's name. They love that stuff. Trevor appeared in the hallway. Board meets in 2 days. I'll take over temporarily. After 6 months, I'll solidify the chair. Vanessa sipped her wine. Good. Keep the media guessing. We need sympathy on our side until we finish the pivot. Trevor smirked. We're already halfway there. Unbeknownst to them, a hidden camera in the corner of the room blinked red. In the Catskills, Richard watched the whole thing. Every smirk, every plan, every lie. His jaw clenched. They've been waiting for me to die for years. Michael looked up. What are you going to do? Richard leaned forward, eyes burning with something cold and quiet. I'm going to let them win, just enough. Then I'll take everything. Meanwhile in Queens, Marcus Jennings sat on the edge of his twin bed in a tiny third-floor walk-up. He stared at the funeral program in his hands, not at Richard's photo, but at the names beneath it. Vanessa Langston, Trevor Langston, Juliana Langston. He whispered to himself. You all smile too easily today. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Meet me at the old warehouse on 43rd Avenue 9 p.m. Come alone. No name. Just a message. Marcus looked out the window at the darkening city. Something was happening. Something bigger than grief. And he wasn't sure whose side he was on anymore. Rain lashed against the windows of the Catskills estate like a warning. The storm outside matched the storm brewing inside Richard Langston's chest. He sat at the long mahogany desk in the study, staring at a worn, yellowed envelope. On the front, in careful cursive, "To Vanessa, if I'm gone." He had written it 3 years ago, during his first health scare. A handwritten letter meant to comfort, explain, or confess. But now, it was just another piece of fiction. Another thread in the tapestry of a lie too big to untangle. He tossed it into the fire. Michael, seated across the room, spoke cautiously. "You sure about this?" Richard didn't answer right away. He watched the paper curl and darken in the flames. "She mourned me like a woman who couldn't wait to cash in." Michael opened his laptop. "I pulled the footage from the memorial. That note she clutched? It was from Calvin Prescott." Richard's eyebrows arched. "Prescott? My attorney." "Yup. He and Vanessa met in the conservatory the night before. No cameras there, just audio. She told him to fast-track the transfer of your offshore assets. She's raiding the vault." Michael nodded, with a smile on her face. Richard stood, slow and deliberate. "She thinks I'm in the ground, but I'm just getting started." Back in Manhattan, Trevor's power play. In the conference room at Langston Holdings' Midtown headquarters, Trevor sat at the head of the table. He wore his father's old cufflinks, not as a tribute, but as a trophy. The board members looked at him expectantly. "I'm not here to replace my father," he began, "but to evolve his vision. We need leaner investments. Diversify. Expand aggressively into crypto and biotech. The name Langston should be synonymous with the future." There were murmurs of agreement. One older board member cleared his throat. "What about Richard's humanitarian divisions? The education fund? The housing projects?" Trevor's smile was tight. "Deadweight. We'll phase them out gradually." No one objected. No one dared. Outside the boardroom, Juliana took selfies in front of her father's memorial plaque. "New York royalty," she captioned it. A broken heart emoji, followed by champagne glasses. The family wasn't grieving. They were rebranding. Queens, the warehouse meeting. At 9 p.m. sharp, Marcus Jennings stepped into the shadowy warehouse off 43rd Avenue. The city's hum faded behind thick steel walls and broken windows. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, flickering. He wasn't alone. A woman stepped out from the shadows. Mid-50s. Curly red hair, sharp cheekbones, eyes that had seen more than they should. Her name was Lena Ford. "You don't know me," she said, "but I knew your mother. Long ago." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Why am I here?" She held up a thumb drive. "Because you deserve to know the truth. About Richard Langston. About yourself." Marcus laughed bitterly. "You think I don't know the truth? I watched him live in gold and leave me scraps. I watched him throw money at people who hated him more than I ever could." Lena's voice softened. "You think you're the outsider, the help, but you're closer to him than you realize." "What are you talking about?" She stepped forward, close enough that he could see the tremble in her hands. "Because he's not just your employer. He's your father." Silence. Marcus blinked. "That's not possible." Lena nodded. "Your mother, Tamara. She worked for him. 29 years ago. They had an affair. He didn't know. She never told him." Marcus staggered back. The warehouse suddenly too small, the air too thick. Lena handed him the thumb drive. "Proofs on here. DNA records. Old letters. Emails." He stared at it like it might explode. "I'm not asking you to forgive him," Lena said, "but I am asking you to find out who he really is before it's too late." She disappeared into the shadows as quickly as she came. Marcus stood alone, shaking, heart racing. The man he resented his entire life, the one whose casket he helped lower into the ground, might be his own blood. Back in the Catskills, a man reborn. Richard walked the estate grounds as dawn broke, mist curling over the hills like secrets rising from the earth. Michael joined him with a thick file. "DNA tests are in. Marcus Jennings is your son." Richard froze. His breath caught. "That's not possible." "It is." Richard took the file with trembling hands. Photographs. Letters. A copy of Marcus's birth certificate. Mother, Tamara Ford. Father, unknown. A paternity test, time-stamped 1 week ago. Confirmed a 99.9% match. Michael whispered, "He's your only real family." Richard closed his eyes. Not Vanessa. Not Trevor. Not Juliana. The boy who opened his doors every morning. Who knew his coffee order. Who drove him to chemo treatments when no one else showed up. That was his son. And neither of them knew it. Until now. Vanessa Langston's penthouse on the Upper East Side glittered like a jewelry showroom. The place had been redecorated since the funeral, subtly, but tellingly. The massive oil portrait of Richard that once hung in the foyer, replaced with a minimalist black and gold art piece titled Freedom. She sat at the vanity, swiping on ruby lipstick, when the front door opened. "Trevor," she called, expecting her son. But it wasn't Trevor. It was Calvin Prescott, her late husband's lawyer, and, unknown to the world, her longtime secret lover. Calvin closed the door behind him, loosening his tie. "You look radiant," he said, pouring himself a scotch without asking. Vanessa didn't smile. "You're late. I had to clean up your son's latest PR nightmare. He fired 3 department heads and called them dead wood on LinkedIn." Vanessa sighed, annoyed. "He's impulsive, but manageable." Calvin sat across from her, swirling his drink. "You know this won't last, right? The board is already sniffing around. They don't trust Trevor." Vanessa turned slowly. "They trust me. Only as long as they believe you're Richard's grieving widow." She smiled at that, cold, smug. "They'll believe whatever I tell them." He paused, then stepped closer. "We've come too far for mistakes now. You said you'd marry me once the dust settled." "I said I'd consider it." Calvin raised an eyebrow. "That wasn't the tone when we were hiding in his Hamptons estate, planning this." Vanessa's eyes darkened. "Planning what, Calvin? I didn't ask Richard to die. You didn't stop him either." She stood up, suddenly fierce. "Don't you dare imply I had anything to do with this." A knock on the door cut her off. It was Juliana, holding a Louis Vuitton bag, eyes red from tears, or maybe a botched eyelash appointment. "Mom," she sniffed. "We need to talk. About the estate." Calvin stepped away, giving the illusion of distance, like a proper gentleman. Vanessa plastered on her step-forward smile. "Of course, darling." Juliana didn't sit. "There's something wrong with the bank accounts. The Cayman wire hasn't come through. And Dad's personal account? It's frozen." Vanessa stiffened. "That's not possible. I called the bank. They said someone placed a legal hold. Not a mistake. A court order." Calvin's face went pale. "That's impossible." "No. One else has access." Juliana looked between them. "Do you think someone's trying to contest the will?" Vanessa tried to brush it off, but inside, her hands trembled. She hadn't just lost control. She was being watched. Marcus sat in his tiny apartment above a liquor store in Harlem, the thumb drive plugged into his laptop. He hadn't moved for hours. Photos, emails, a letter from Tamara to Lena. He can never know. Richard has a family now, and Marcus will be safer if he grows up without that shadow. Marcus rubbed his jaw, feeling like his world had been cracked open. The man he'd called sir, all these years, the man whose suits he dry-cleaned, whose dogs he walked on Sundays, was his biological father? And now he was dead. Or was he? He pulled out a worn envelope he found in the file, addressed to Calvin Prescott. Inside was a typed letter. No signature. Just one sentence. "Sometimes the dead have more power than the living." It was dated 2 days after the funeral. Something didn't sit right. Marcus called Lena. "I need to see where he died. Now." Richard stood before a mirror in the guest room, staring at his reflection like he hadn't seen it in years. Clean-shaven. No disguise. Just the man behind the fortune. Behind the lies. Michael walked in, holding a burner phone. "She froze your Cayman accounts." Richard didn't flinch. "I expected that. She's also been moving your art collection, selling off quiet pieces through third-party brokers." Richard nodded. "Good. Let her think she's winning." Michael looked uncertain. "You still want to go through with the reveal?" Richard turned, eyes sharper than ever. No, not yet. First, I want to see what happens when I'm not in the way. What do you mean? I want to see who they are without me. Stripped bare. No handouts. No security net. Michael frowned. You're playing with fire. I created this fire, Richard said. Now I want to see who dances in it. He stared out the window at the rising sun, his reflection ghostly in the glass. I buried Richard Langston. Let's see who climbs out of the grave. 2 weeks later, the Langston family was unraveling faster than a Wall Street crash. At the center of the storm, Trevor Langston sat in the executive chair once occupied by his father. He had taken control of Langston Holdings with a smugness only inherited wealth could afford. The problem was, he didn't know how to drive the machine. The stock price had dipped 7% in 5 days. 2 key partners pulled out of pending deals. Anonymous whispers were surfacing in the financial blogs. Was Richard Langston's empire being mismanaged by his clueless heir? Trevor ignored them. He was too busy doing photo ops, getting custom suits tailored, and planning a launch party for a luxury watch brand he didn't even understand. Across the office, the longtime CFO, an icy but brilliant woman named Claire Winslow, finally stepped into his office with a red folder. "We have a problem," she said bluntly. Trevor didn't look up from his phone. "Is it urgent, Claire? Because I've got a GQ shoot in 20. This is bigger than press. The Department of Financial Compliance has opened an inquiry into shell account movements under your name." Trevor froze. "That's impossible." Claire narrowed her eyes. "Then you should take a look at the wire transfer to Montreal Asset Group. $3.8 million, approved under your private code." He stood slowly. "You think I did that?" Claire didn't flinch. "I don't think anything. But someone's making it look like you did." He swallowed. "Are you saying I'm being set up?" She nodded once. "Or worse, you're being tested." Marcus stood on the rooftop of his building, the city stretching endlessly around him. He couldn't sleep. His mind was riddled with questions. He had run the DNA swab, matched the handwriting from the old letter, and read every document from the thumb drive, again and again. One piece stuck with him, a scanned, grainy image of a hospital paternity test. Richard Langston listed as alleged father. The child, Marcus James Monroe. The mother, Tamara Jean Monroe. His mom. Everything he thought he knew had just been obliterated. He hadn't told her yet. Couldn't. He needed to see Richard's old estate. See where it all ended. He called a contact at a private security firm and bribed his way into the death site, Langston's country estate in the Catskills. But when he got there, something strange happened. The guard at the gate didn't ask for ID. He just looked Marcus in the eye and let him in. The path up the mountain felt familiar, like a memory trying to wake up. At the edge of the estate, he noticed a car parked near the old stables. It was dusty, but the hood was warm, and near the stables, boot prints, fresh ones, leading toward the back entrance. Marcus followed them, and the back door? Unlocked. Richard stood behind a curtain inside the estate's conservatory, staring through the glass as Marcus wandered toward the old oak tree where a plaque had once read, "The world gives you mirrors. Be the one who breaks them." It was his personal motto, one he had coined in a speech when Marcus was just a teenager. Now Marcus was here, like fate had pushed him forward. Michael appeared at Richard's side, tense. "That's your driver." "I know. He's not just poking around. He's digging." Richard's gaze didn't move. "Let him." Michael stiffened. "He finds out you're alive. Everything collapses." Richard turned, eyes fierce. "You think I'm hiding from him?" Michael was confused. "Then why let him get this close?" Richard walked to the desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a photo. It was of Tamara Monroe holding a newborn, dated 28 years ago. His signature was scrawled on the back in faded ink. "If you ever need me, I'll be waiting." Richard stared at the photo, then back out the window. "Because I need to know if I'm more than just a man who failed everyone." Meanwhile, Vanessa wasn't done playing Queen of Ashes. She was at Calvin Prescott's loft. High ceilings, exposed brick, overpriced wine chilling in a brushed nickel bucket. "You need to fix this," she snapped, holding a document out. It was a photo of Richard, dated 3 days ago. In a pharmacy. Alive and well. Someone had emailed it anonymously. The subject line? He's not dead. Game on. Vanessa was pale. If he's alive, everything we did, every asset I moved, every lie I spun, it could all come back to bite me. Calvin clenched his jaw. Then we do what we should have done in the beginning. Vanessa narrowed her eyes. What's that? Finish the job. The air inside Tamara Monroe's modest brownstone in Harlem was thick with the scent of lavender oil and silence. Marcus sat across from his mother at the kitchen table, fingers steepled, eyes locked on hers. Tell me the truth, he said, voice barely a whisper. Was Richard Langston my father? Tamara froze. Her hands, which had been kneading biscuit dough on instinct, came to a halt. For a moment, all Marcus could hear was the low hum of the refrigerator. How did you find out? She asked quietly. Does it matter? Tamara turned, reaching for a dish towel, her back to him. I didn't want you to grow up thinking you were unwanted. I didn't, Marcus replied. I grew up thinking I didn't belong anywhere. She faced him again, tears threatening. Richard didn't leave us. He didn't even know I was pregnant. Marcus blinked. What? Tamara's voice cracked. We were young. He wasn't a billionaire then, just a broke investor trying to hustle in the Bronx. When I told his assistant about the pregnancy, I was told he'd left the country for a tech deal. Said he wasn't coming back. I wrote letters. I called. Nothing. Marcus's stomach twisted. So he never knew. She shook her head. I didn't even tell you because I thought it didn't matter. He was a ghost, and you were my whole world. Silence fell again. Marcus stared at the table, every thread of anger untangling itself into confusion. If Richard never knew, that meant he hadn't rejected them. He hadn't chosen money over family. He'd been robbed of the chance. Mom, Marcus whispered, his throat dry. He's alive. Tamara's breath hitched. What? I saw him. Or, I'm sure I did. He faked his death. And I think he knows who I am now. Tamara covered her mouth, eyes wide. God help us, she murmured. In a dim room at the estate, Richard Langston watched Marcus's brownstone through a grainy surveillance feed. Michael sat beside him, fidgeting, watching his boss come undone in silence. He knows, Michael finally said. What now? Richard exhaled hard. I need to speak to Tamara. After 30 years? She's the only person who ever looked at me like I wasn't a commodity. Michael scoffed. You mean she didn't care about your billions? Richard's eyes darkened. Exactly. He stood, straightened his coat, set up a meeting. Neutral ground. No more lies. Meanwhile, Vanessa Langston sat in a boardroom with Trevor and 2 high-powered attorneys. Her face was as calm as porcelain. She was planning a hostile takeover of the estate. If Richard is dead, control of his remaining holdings passes to the spouse and children under trust laws, one attorney explained. But if he's alive? Vanessa's jaw tightened. He won't be. Trevor leaned back, arms crossed. You don't even seem surprised he might be alive. I'm not, Vanessa said coldly. Richard's always been clever, but he's never beaten me in a long game. Trevor smirked. You sure about that? Vanessa turned toward him. What's that supposed to mean? Trevor slid a glossy manila envelope across the table. I had my own investigator look into you and Prescott. It's all there. Vanessa opened it and paled. Photos, emails, financial trails, recordings. Trevor leaned in, grinned devilish. Guess who's going to the press tomorrow morning? Vanessa's voice dropped. You little snake. No, mother. Trevor sneered. I'm the new king of this castle. And you're just another pawn who got too comfortable. A week later, Richard waited on a rooftop garden in Soho. The city's noise below faded into the background as he stood by the railing, staring at the skyline, wondering what to say to a son he never knew he had. Marcus appeared at the edge of the roof, walking slowly, cautiously. I thought you were dead, he said plainly. I thought I never had a son, Richard replied, his voice heavier than steel. They stared at each other for a long moment. You're not what I expected, Marcus finally said. Richard chuckled darkly. Neither are you. Marcus held up a thumb drive. Everything's on here. What Trevor's done. What Vanessa planned. Even who you used to be, before all this madness. Richard accepted it slowly. You could have gone to the press. I thought about it, Marcus admitted. But I figured you deserve the truth, before the world does. And what do you want in return? Nothing. Richard blinked. No blackmail. No inheritance demands. Marcus shook his head. You can't inherit time. Or love. You just earn it, moment by moment. I guess I came to see if you're willing to earn that now. Richard's eyes welled, the weight of 3 decades, finally breaking him open. He stepped forward and hugged his son. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't clean. But it was real. And for Richard Langston, that was a start. The marble corridors of the Langston estate echoed with loneliness. Vanessa sat alone in the conservatory, her silk robe cinched tightly, a glass of red wine trembling in her manicured fingers. The fire in the hearth crackled quietly, casting flickers of light across her face, once radiant, now hollow. She had lost control. Trevor's betrayal burned more than she expected. Her own son, turning the sword she sharpened against her. Worse, the media storm he promised had landed. Billionaire's widow caught in affair with a state lawyer, Langston family imploding. Trevor Langston exposes his mother's years of manipulation. Is Richard Langston still alive? Every headline was another cut to her reputation, her security, her illusion. And then came the knock. 3 soft raps on the grand glass doors. Vanessa's blood chilled. She turned. It was Richard. Not a ghost. Not a memory. Him. Standing alive and composed, with eyes colder than she remembered and a presence she could never manipulate again. She didn't move. Didn't speak. Only stared. Richard stepped inside, glancing around the room he once built for her as a wedding gift. Still clinging to the dream, huh? Vanessa stood slowly, glass still in hand. So it's true. You're really alive. Unfortunately for you, he replied. She laughed hollow. Why fake it, Richard? Was this your revenge? After all these years? I wanted the truth. About you. About our family. And did you get it? She hissed, circling him like a viper. Did playing dead give you clarity? Richard didn't flinch. It gave me the one thing I never had with you, perspective. He dropped a thick envelope onto the grand piano behind her. She opened it. Divorce papers. I'm done pretending, he said. Done believing the lie that our marriage was ever about love. Vanessa's composure cracked. You don't get to walk in here after faking your death and play the saint. You lied too. You ran away. Because I was suffocating, he snapped. I built a fortune for a family that only saw me as a walking ATM. You made me believe that was love. That was loyalty. And now what? She whispered, tears threatening. You run off into the sunset with some illegitimate son? No, Richard replied quietly. I rebuild. I reclaim my life. I give it to the people who still believe in what I stand for. And what do I get? He stared at her with something like pity. You get the truth. Finally, you get to live with who you chose to be. And then, without another word, he turned and walked out. Vanessa didn't chase him. She sank to her knees, surrounded by the echo of everything she once controlled, now slipping through her fingers like sand. Tamara and Vanessa had never met. But today, in a quiet corner of Central Park, Richard made sure they did. Tamara arrived first, calm but guarded. Vanessa came next, draped in sunglasses and silence. You wanted to meet, Tamara said. So talk. Vanessa sat, pulling off her shades. Her eyes were tired. Raw. Human. I just wanted to look at the woman who gave Richard the only real thing he's had. Tamara blinked. Meaning. Vanessa chuckled bitterly. Love. Family. A son who's not chasing his money. Tamara didn't reply. Vanessa continued, voice trembling. I didn't know how to love him. I knew how to manage, manipulate, survive. That's what Wall Street taught me. What my parents taught me. But love, no one showed me that. Until you watched it from the outside, Tamara finished. Vanessa nodded slowly. Don't let him hate me forever. Tamara stood. That's not my call to make. And just like that, she walked away, graceful, composed, strong. Vanessa stayed on the bench, smaller than she'd ever been. The morning air was crisp and dry as Richard and Marcus stood beneath the steel-gray sky at the edge of a quiet marina in Jersey City. The skyline of Manhattan loomed across the water, cold and indifferent, like the past they were both learning to reckon with. Marcus leaned against the hood of a vintage black Mercedes, the one Richard had always reserved for personal business, but hadn't driven in years. He glanced at the man beside him. "So, what now?" Richard stared out across the water. "Now we confirm it." Marcus swallowed hard. "You really think my mom was telling the truth?" "I don't know what to believe anymore," Richard admitted. "But she's never asked me for anything. She had every reason to come forward before now, and she didn't. That means something." They were waiting for the call. The DNA test had been submitted a week earlier, quietly, anonymously, through a private lab Richard trusted more than his own estate lawyer. He hadn't told a soul except Marcus and Tamara. It had been the longest week of Richard's life. Just as Marcus opened his mouth to speak, Richard's phone rang. A chill shot down his spine. He answered, pressing it to his ear slowly. A pause. "Mr. Langston," came the lab tech's voice. "The results are in. Based on the sample comparisons you submitted, you are a biological match to the subject. A 99.998% probability. He's your son." Richard's throat tightened. "Thank you." He hung up and turned slowly to Marcus. "You're mine," he said, voice hoarse. "You're really my son." Marcus blinked, stunned. "You're serious?" "I should have known," Richard whispered. "The way you looked out for me. The quiet loyalty. The way you remind me of myself, before the billions." Marcus tried to laugh, but couldn't. His voice broke. "I always thought something was missing. Some part of me I couldn't explain." Richard stepped forward, slowly wrapping his arms around Marcus. They embraced, for the first time not as boss and employee, but as father and son. No cameras, no inheritance, no boardroom agenda, just blood and truth. Richard sat at his desk in his penthouse apartment. The city lights blinked behind him like stars that had lost their place in the sky. Beside him sat James, his long-trusted estate attorney. A fresh will rested on the table, its pages thick with decisions. Trevor was removed. Vanessa's claim to the estate revoked. In their place, Marcus Jennings. Richard slid a pen across the paper and signed his name. "I don't want this to be about revenge," Richard said quietly. "Make sure they're taken care of, modestly. But I won't let my legacy belong to people who only saw me as a checkbook." James nodded. "And Marcus?" "He'll have full control. Not just the money. The foundation. The company. I want him to rebuild what I tore down trying to impress people who never truly loved me." James raised a brow. "Do you think he's ready?" Richard smiled faintly. "He was born ready. He just never had the name to prove it." A week later, Richard Langston made his grand return, not with a press release or a TV interview, but by walking into the boardroom of Langston Holdings in a tailored charcoal suit, alive and sharper than ever. The room fell into a stunned silence. Chairs creaked. Mouths hung open. Trevor, who had been gloating over his control of the company in Richard's absence, turned ghost white. "Good morning," Richard said smoothly, placing a thick folder on the table. "I believe you've all had time to enjoy your fantasies. Now let's return to reality." Cameras clicked outside the glass windows of the corporate tower. Word had already leaked. Richard Langston, the billionaire who vanished, was alive. The building buzzed with disbelief. Trevor stammered, You're supposed to be dead." Richard cut in. "Disappointed I'm not." The room chuckled nervously. Trevor lunged for damage control. "Look, Richard, I was only trying to stabilize things." "No, Trevor," Richard snapped, his voice thunderous. "You were trying to replace me. You held secret votes. You moved assets. You thought you could steal my life while my body was still warm." He opened the folder and revealed a stack of documents, proof of board manipulation, offshore diversions, and power grabs orchestrated by Trevor. "I knew if I stayed, I wouldn't see the truth," Richard continued. "So I left to see who would dance on my grave before it was dug." He looked around the room, locking eyes with each board member. And now I see clearly. Trevor slumped into his seat. The weight of exposure hung heavy on his shoulders. As of today, Richard said, I'm stepping down as CEO. Gasps. Whispers. Even Trevor lifted his head in confusion. But I'm not leaving this company in your hands, Richard added. I'm appointing someone who understands loyalty, grit, and vision. He turned. The boardroom doors opened. In walked Marcus Jennings, fresh haircut, tailored suit, and the quiet confidence of someone who had worked from the bottom up. This is my son, Richard announced. Stunned silence turned into a buzz of murmurs. Effective immediately, Marcus will be co-chairman of the Langston Foundation and future steward of this company's legacy. He earned it, not through blood, through character. Marcus nodded politely, then turned to Trevor. Your office has already been cleared. Security will escort you out. Trevor stood, raging. You can't do this. Yes, Richard said coldly. I can, and I just did. As security entered, Trevor was let out, furious and humiliated. The meeting adjourned, but a new era had just begun. That night, Richard returned to the suburbs, not to his old home, but to a small, ivy-covered house in Scarsdale. He knocked. The door opened. Tamara stood there in a simple robe, her eyes widening as she saw the man she once loved. You look the same, she said with a soft smile. Richard smiled back. You look better. He stepped inside, carrying a bottle of wine. They talked for hours, about what could have been, what had been lost, and what was still possible. Richard didn't make promises, but as Tamara leaned her head on his shoulder, and Marcus joined them by the fireplace, he knew this was where he belonged. Not in penthouses, not in boardrooms, but here, where hearts were real and love was not a transaction. The autumn breeze swept through Central Park, rustling golden leaves across the winding paths. The skyline stood still in the backdrop, like a silent observer to the quiet transformation of a man who had once ruled Wall Street, but now walked its edges with new clarity. Richard Langston strolled beside Marcus, the son he never knew he had until weeks ago. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was filled with understanding, a kind of peace that didn't require words. I don't know how to be a father, Richard finally admitted, stopping near the Bethesda fountain. Marcus looked at him. I don't know how to be a son, but we can learn. Richard chuckled softly. I spent years looking for loyalty in the wrong places. I thought the people closest to me, my wife, my kids, my board, loved me, but they loved my money, my power, not me. Marcus nodded. Mom always told me you were a good man, just not ready. She was right. They sat on a bench overlooking the water. Children played in the distance. Couples laughed. Joggers passed. Life continued, unaware of the quiet resolution unfolding under the soft afternoon sun. You're going to do great things, Richard said, but never let your name be louder than your character. Marcus turned to him. And you? Richard looked out across the lake. I'm going to build something new, with people who never needed to be impressed. I thought I needed a legacy, but maybe I just needed a home. From the path ahead, Tamara approached, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. She smiled warmly, offering one to Richard and the other to Marcus. They sat there, 3 people, once separated by secrets, now bound by truth. No press, no boardrooms, no golden mansions, just a bench, a breeze, and the realization that everything worth having can't be bought. It must be earned. As the sun dipped lower, Richard pulled out his old watch, ticking quietly. It was the only thing he wore that day with any real value. He handed it to Marcus. This belonged to my father. He gave it to me the day I took over Langston Holdings. I don't want you to wear it because of what it's worth. I want you to wear it so you always remember what time really is. A chance. To start over. To choose better. Marcus nodded, accepting it with reverence. The watch ticked, and with each second, a new legacy began, not of wealth or empires, but of honesty, love, and second chances. Because when the curtain falls, all that remains is who stood with you in the dark. In a world obsessed with image, prestige, and the illusion of permanence, Richard Langston faked his death to discover the truth. He thought he'd find love in those closest to him, Instead, he found betrayal. He thought he'd lose everything. Instead, he found the one thing money couldn't buy, a family forged not by blood alone, but by choice. So ask yourself, if everything was stripped away, your title, your fortune, your name, who would still be standing by your side? Because the answer to that is the only truth that ever mattered. If this story touched you, share it with someone who still believes in second chances. Like, subscribe, and follow Echoes of Truth, where every story dares to ask, what really matters in the end?